Excellences,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I call to order the 32nd meeting of the 25th session of the Human Rights Council. We will continue our interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The next speaker on my list is the delegation of Ireland. You have the floor, Excellency.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Ireland welcomes the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, Mr. Shahid, and thanks him for his dedication to his mandate, his report to the Council and his presentation today. We would like to make some remarks in addition to those made on our behalf in the statement of the European Union. While we agree with the Special Rapporteur that a number of positive steps have been taken by the Iranian authorities in recent months, we also share his assessment that these do not address fully the human rights concerns raised by the Council, the General Assembly and others. We are concerned, for example, that the draft Charter on Citizens' Rights, published in late 2013, in fact contains no new rights and subjects the exercise of rights to the existing legal framework, which has for a long time been a source of concern to the United Nations human rights machinery. In particular, the Charter as currently drafted fails to address laws and policies that discriminate against religious minorities, including the Baha'i, and insufficiently addresses discrimination against women. It does not address the use of cruel, inhumane or degrading punishment, including flogging, hanging, stoning and amputation. It does not prohibit the execution of juveniles, nor does it address other concerns about the use of capital punishment. We continue to have serious concerns about the high number of executions in Iran, including the high proportion of executions of members of national minorities and the use of the death penalty for certain vaguely defined crimes of a national security nature. The situation of members of religious minorities continues to be of concern. We note in particular the information contained in the Special Rapporteur's report on the situation of the Baha'is, including that they are regularly prosecuted for participation in their community affairs, including by facilitating educational services and publicly engaging in religious practices such as attending devotional gatherings, but that they are typically charged with political or security crimes such as espionage or propaganda against the ruling system. The lack of legal recognition of the Baha'i faith appears to result in its adherents being treated as less than equal citizens by the legal system. In conclusion, I would like to ask the Special Rapporteur the following question. How, in your opinion, could the international community assist the Islamic Republic of Iran to bring its legislation into accordance with its international human rights obligations? I thank you, Mr. President.
je remercie l'Irlande.
Thank you, Ireland. I now give the floor to Vietnam.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm asked to deliver the statement by our ambassador's permanent representative as follows. Mr. President, my delegation appreciatively takes note of the report of Special Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid for continuing to update the Councils on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Vietnam warmly welcomes positive signs from a score of promising developments that have been made by the new government of Iran since June 2013's election. It is encouraging to see that Iran's new approach on its strategic energy program has paved the way for promoting mutual trust and constructive cooperation, thus significantly contributing to its socio-economic development and enhancing the promotion and protection for civil, political, social, cultural and economic rights in the country. We all hope with encouragement and support to see more good news as a result of the government's continued efforts in the coming time. Good results are there to be further amplified and multiplied, and enormous challenges are also to be overcome with the steadier commitments and practical effort. At the Council, we commend Iran for its commitment as declared in the recent high-level segment that, on the basis of provision of Constitution of Iran and its international obligations, Iran will strive to fulfill its promises to promote the aspirations of its people. Mr. President, my delegation is in the position that promotion and protection of human rights must be based on the principle of sovereignty, constructive cooperation and genuine dialogue, while strengthening the capacity of member states to comply with the human rights obligation for the benefits of all human beings. Vietnam therefore urged the Council and international community to further encourage and support Iran's efforts and commitments on regional and international cooperation, as well as its socio-economic development toward the full enjoyment of all human rights and freedom for the Iranian people in the region. In that spirit, Vietnam is ready to share with Iran and others her experience and good practice in national socio-economic development and regional and international integration. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le Vietnam.
Thank you, Vietnam. The Maldives now has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Maldives takes note of the reports of the Secretary General and the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Maldives is encouraged by the Iranians' engagement with the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights and the UN treaty bodies. In this spirit, we call upon Iran to intensify its engagement with the UN system to create an environment of dialogue where the concerns of both sides could be addressed. Mr. President, the Maldives welcomes the recent pledges by the Iranian President to address human rights concerns, including the rights of women, ethnic minorities, freedom of expression and censorship. The Maldives takes note of the government of Iran's decision to release high-profile political prisoners who had been arrested following the 2009 post-elections unrest. The Maldives is, however, concerned by the reports of arbitrary detentions, increase in the number of executions, and restrictions in the freedom of expression and opinion in the country. The Maldives remains convinced that Iran should engage constructively with the United Nations system in an open, transparent, and non-politicized manner. With the intention in providing assistance to the country, the Maldives had actively supported the establishment of the mandate in 2011. Mr. President, as we had noted in our statement in last March, the Council needs to look at alternative strategies and approaches in addressing the question at hand. The Council cannot let the current deadlock hinder any longer our efforts to provide the people of Iran their rights. The Maldives is a staunch supporter of the international human rights system and believes that the special procedure mechanism is a fundamental pillar that is cemented on the values of independence, impartiality, neutrality and efficiency. Therefore, the Maldives requests the Council to be mindful and ensure that all UN Special Rapporteurs observe their code of conduct and maintain the professional integrity of their office and the UN. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Ambassador. Belarus now has the floor. Mr. President, Belarus reaffirms its position that human rights issues in a global context and with respect to each individual country should be considered as part of a constructive and non-politicized dialogue, one which is based on the principles of non-selectivity and transparency, objectivity and impartiality, respect for national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-intervention in internal affairs. We emphasize that it is these principles and approaches which UN member states enshrined as the foundation of the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism. During the 5 years it has been in existence, the UPR has shown its effectiveness and has become a real mechanism capable of genuinely encouraging states to resolve existing problems and to work exhaustively on a daily basis to encourage and protect all categories of human rights. Unfortunately, we must note that those who proposed introducing the post of a country-specific special rapporteur have taken a different approach, an approach which is subjective, which ignores real political and economic situations in countries, and also efforts and achievements made by the Iranian government to protect and promote all categories of human rights. They use the activities of the special rapporteur to justify sanctions against Iran. In this connection, Belarus once again emphasizes our position of principle that we do not accept country-specific special procedures, as they are a means of political pressure on sovereign states. We note the need for a constructive approach to the promotion and protection of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. We emphasize the role of the UPR as a universal mechanism, called upon to consider country situations on the basis of cooperation and constructive dialogue. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Pakistan now has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the steps taken by the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the protection and promotion of human rights in the country. Some of the important steps are 14 June presidential election, that was a demonstration of democratic values. A committee has been established under the supervision of Vice President for Legal Affairs to draft a Charter of Citizenship Rights as a top priority. Invitation to the High Commissioner for Human Rights to pay a visit to Iran. And in May 2013, Iran appeared before the Committee on Social, Cultural and Economic Rights to defend its report. We feel that the steps taken by Iran need to be acknowledged. Mr. President, principally, we are against the country-specific mandates as they are against the spirit of cooperation and dialogue. We strongly believe that a universal periodic review is a cooperative mechanism which is based on an interactive dialogue and full involvement of the country concerned. Participation of almost every country from all regional and political divides bears testimony to this belief that discussing human rights concerns in a non-politicized manner is the best way to attain cooperation and addressing specific concerns. Mr. President, the Islamic Republic of Iran participated in its first UPR in 2010 in a constructive and positive manner. With the same spirit, Iran would participate in its second UPR in October 2014. Any country having genuine desire for improvement of human rights may make recommendations to the concerned country during the UPR process. Any effort leading away from the objectives of cooperation and equal treatment would not serve the objective and would further politicize the Council. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia now has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Republic of Macedonia aligns itself with a statement made by the European Union, and in addition we would like to make the following comments. The Republic of Macedonia would like to commend the work of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran, Dr. Ahmad Shahid, and we would like to thank for his comprehensive report. While noting some elements in the report, in particular changes of the state's law on criminal proceedings, we remain concerned with the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We regret the worsening situation with the application of the death penalty, especially in light of the consistent denial of due process and fair trial standards. We are concerned with the number of executions in course of 2014, and in particular the execution on juvenile offenders. Furthermore, we remain deeply dismayed by the continued disregard of the rights of minors in criminal proceedings. Torture and ill treatment of prisoners continues to be practice of security forces. The report enumerates a number of examples of harsh treatment, including sexual violence. Minority rights are another issue of concern. We remain alarmed by the widespread discrimination in law and practice, as well as persecution faced by members of minorities. We regret to note the upward trend of oppression, incitement to violence, and arbitrary detention. The Republic of Macedonia fully supports the renewal of the Special Rapporteur, mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran. Since there was no visit to Iran from 2005, we urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to grant unfettered access to the country, as well as to make an effort in seizing the reprisals against individuals cooperating with the United Nations human rights mechanisms. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
Thank you to the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The United Kingdom has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The UK fully supports the statement of the European Union. The UK would like to thank the Special Rapporteur, Dr. Ahmed Shahid, for his report and presentation. We strongly support the role of the Special Rapporteur and look forward to the renewal of his mandate. The Special Rapporteur continues to produce detailed, independent evidence on the ongoing human rights violations in Iran, as set out in his most recent report. His mandate plays a critical role in holding Iran to account for its human rights record. We're disappointed Iran has not seized the opportunity to engage with the UN on human rights and has prevented Dr. Shahid from visiting the country. We urge Iran to cooperate fully with the Special Rapporteur and afford him the access his mandate warrants. We remain deeply concerned by the human rights situation in Iran. Despite a change in rhetoric from the Iranian government, we have yet to see a real improvement in its human rights record. The UK remains concerned about the high level of executions in Iran, as highlighted by the Special Rapporteur. The UK opposes the use of the death penalty as a matter of principle. Iran continues to use the death penalty for crimes which, based on international standards, cannot be characterized as most serious. We fully support the Special Rapporteur's recommendation that Iran should prohibit capital punishment for juveniles and for crimes that do not meet the most serious crime standards under international law. Mr. President, we note from the Special Rapporteur's report that Iran's draft Charter of Citizens' Rights fails adequately to address laws and policies that discriminate against religious minorities, the use of cruel, inhumane or degrading punishment, and discrimination against women. In the Special Rapporteur's view, how could the Charter best be redrafted to address these points? Furthermore, the UK remains deeply concerned by the persecution of religious minorities, including the Baha'i and Christian communities, and the persecution of ethnic minorities. What steps should Iran take, in the view of the Special Rapporteur, to ensure that all its citizens, regardless of faith or ethnicity, are treated equally? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I now give the floor to Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Italy aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union. We thank you, Special Rapporteur, for your excellent report containing a deep and articulate analysis on the most recent developments in the situation of human rights and in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We are confident that the Iranian authorities will take in serious consideration your recommendations and fully cooperate with your mandate in the future. Italy is looking with interest and expectation at President Rouhani's declarations on human rights, as well as at a significant openness to dialogue recently shown by the Iranian authorities. The Italian government is looking forward to seeing prompt, concrete and positive developments in some crucial areas, such as death penalty, arbitrary detentions and freedom of expression and religion. Italy strongly supports your January 24th joint appeal calling on the Iranian government to urgently adopt a moratorium of the executions. While appreciating the improvements in criminal procedure brought by the adoption of a new law, we encourage the Iranian authorities to rectify its major flaws. Italy pays close attention to the ongoing national debate on freedom of opinion and expression. We truly value the richness of the Iranian history, culture and art, which in our view may complement universal human rights. Recently, the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said that creativity was developed in the light of freedom and that art without freedom was nonsense. Special Rapporteur, could you elaborate on the President's words that enjoy our support? I thank you.
Thank you, Italy. I now give the floor to the delegation of Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation took note of the report presented this morning by Dr. Shahid and would like to stress the fact that the promotion and protection of human rights is an international concern, and every country has its particular challenges. We remain confident that dialogue and consolidated cooperation constitutes the best choice to overcome these challenges. The international cooperation should be the leading principle to provide assistance and advice to the states on a basis of a constructive dialogue. Mr. President, for the special procedures to be useful and fruitful in the endeavor of promotion and protection of human rights, the consent of the concerned country should not be neglected, particularly with regard to the country-specific mandates. Having said that, my delegation would like to invite and encourage a genuine, positive, and constructive dialogue with the Islamic Republic of Iran with regard to the challenges it faces in the field of human rights, with a view to provide the necessary assistance as appropriate. A dialogue that is based on the principles and spirit of fair and unpoliticized international cooperation. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
Thank you, Sudan. I now recognize the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President. Despite Iran's change of administration, we have witnessed no significant improvement in Iran's overall human rights situation. While Iran has begun to shift its rhetoric on human rights, the United States remains deeply concerned that Iran continues to suppress free expression and civil society, harass members of its ethnic and religious minority populations, and imprison human rights defenders and journalists for political purposes. Iran imprisons the second largest number of journalists in the world today, severely limiting the Iranian people's access to information and restricting freedom of expression. On February 20th, Iran's judiciary closed the newspaper Asaman for questioning whether eye for an eye justice is humane. This follows similar closures of reformist publications Bahar and Hamahan in November. We are also concerned by reports of the Iranian government's engagement in the local downlink jamming of satellite broadcasts. Likewise, the plight of Iran's minority communities remains poor. Ethnic minorities, including Kurds, Azeris, Ahwazi Arabs, and Baluch, are sentenced to long jail terms and death sentences on trumped-up security-related charges. Iran's execution of 3 Kurdish activists in October and November was deeply troubling, as was the execution in January of 2 Ahwazi Arab cultural activists for vague security-related charges. Religious minorities, from non-Shia Muslims to Baha'is, are subject to similar harsh treatment simply for practicing their religious beliefs. We take this opportunity to call once again for the release of dual U.S.-Iranian citizen Saeed Abedini, who is currently being held in Iran on charges related to his religious beliefs. The United States also remains concerned by the situation of political prisoners in Iran. While Iran's recent release of dozens of prisoners of conscience, including human rights lawyer Nasrin Sotoudeh, was encouraging, hundreds more remain in detention. Human rights defenders and activists like Abdul Fattah Sultani, Majid Dori, Majid Tavakoli, and Shiva Nazar Ahari should be released immediately. Finally, we also regret that despite Iran's egregious human rights situation, its government persists in refusing to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur. Consistent with Iran's welcome efforts to constructively engage with the international community in other areas, the United States calls on the Iranian government to allow the Rapporteur to visit Iran so that he may carry out the Human Rights Council's mandate. And we call upon this council to renew that mandate this session. Dr. Shahid, given the lack of improvement in Iran's overall human rights situation in the last year, what more can the international community do to persuade the Iranian government to respect the human rights of its people? I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The Ambassador of the Czech Republic has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Czech Republic supports the statement made on behalf of the European Union. Mr. Special Rapporteur, we would like to thank you for your latest report, including the summary of cases submitted to you. While I appreciate the recent attempts of the Iranian government to engage with the international community, nevertheless, we also expect that verbal pledges will be consequently translated into action in order not to exhaust their initial power. To establish the cooperation with the Special Rapporteur and thus allow him to receive the authentic information from credible sources would be highly valued. The Czech Republic took note of the announced release of some 80 prisoners of conscience. However, we are deeply concerned by the reports about the hundreds of persons who remain in some form of confinement, including the human rights defenders, political activists, lawyers, journalists and bloggers, religious practitioners, as well as student activists. As the most alarming, we consider the numerous cases of arbitrary detention of individuals for peacefully exercising their fundamental rights and freedoms. We urge the government of Iran to release all political prisoners and develop policies preventing the detentions of people on arbitrary basis. In this context, we have been informed that families and friends of detained citizens are often subject to various harassment on the grounds of their proximity to the detained person. Mr. Special Rapporteur, would you please elaborate more on the practical measures to be taken by the Iranian authorities to prevent such practices? The Czech Republic fully shares your opinion, Mr. Special Rapporteur, that much needs to be done in the area of judiciary, including the independence of judges and safeguards for a fair trial. We are also seriously disconcerted by reported intimidations of lawyers for carrying out their professional responsibilities. Hand in hand with these shortcomings goes the inaccurate practical application of principles and norms enacted in both international covenants as well as the national constitution. We deeply regret that Iran, although normatively well equipped, often fails in fulfillment of these international legal obligations. Mr. Special Rapporteur, the Czech Republic is interested in your ideas regarding the concrete steps that must be carried out in order to ensure the independence of judges and their compliance with the above-mentioned norms. Mr. Special Rapporteur, we would like to wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
My thanks to you, Your Excellency, and I now recognize the Ambassador of Botswana.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Botswana thanks the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive report. We note with appreciation the positive developments in the reform of administration of justice in Iran, which are aimed at strengthening the protection and promotion of human rights. These include the proposal of a new Charter for Citizens' Rights and a new criminal procedure law, among others. We remain hopeful that the government of Iran will continue its legal reforms with a view to addressing the shortcomings in its legislation in the area of human rights as identified in the report. Particular focus should be given to laws and practices that infringe upon the rights to education, non-discrimination, as well as to the freedoms of expression, association, assembly, belief, and religion. We also welcome the release of 80 detainees, some of whom, according to the report, appear to have been arrested for peacefully exercising their fundamental rights to expression, belief, association, or assembly. Botswana, however, remains concerned that there are still many other detainees, some of whom are reported to have been arbitrarily arrested and held for prolonged periods. According to the report, there are at least 895 prisoners of conscience and political prisoners in the Iranian prisons and detention facilities. These include 379 political activists, 292 religious practitioners, 92 human rights defenders, including 50 ethnic rights activists, 71 civic activists, 37 journalists, and 24 student activists. What is even more troubling are reports that detainees are held in abusive conditions that violate both national and international safeguards for humane and fair treatment of detained and accused persons. We are also concerned by last year's introduction of the Political Crime Bill, which is currently being reviewed by the Cultural Commission. From the definition of what constitute political crimes in Articles 1 and 2 of the bill, it is clear that the bill will further limit freedom of expression, association, and assembly. This is likely to further stifle opposition political parties and suppress freedom of religion and worship. We hope Iran will take measures to avert this. Another area that is also of concern to Botswana is the reported lack of independence of judges and lawyers. The report indicates that the judges are heavily influenced by security and intelligence organizations. It also indicates the prevalence of threats, intimidation, detention and prosecution of lawyers, some for merely questioning the methods employed by authorities in extracting evidence from their clients while in custody. We also ask Iran to eliminate discrimination against religious minorities, including Baha'i and Christians. Finally, we encourage the government of Iran to cooperate with the Special Rapporteur. In our view, the recommendations in the report are quite fair and warrant implementation by Iran. I thank you, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie l'ambassadeur.
My thanks to you, Your Excellency, and I now recognize the Ambassador of Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, President. The existence of a Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran and this very interactive dialogue are clear examples of the discriminatory, politicized and double-standard practices that have unfortunately taken root in this Human Rights Council. Cuba reiterates its unequivocal and staunch position of principle that opposes country-specific resolutions and selective mandates singling out nations of the global south, all of which undermine the atmosphere of cooperation and dialogue that is so essential and vital in the context of the work of this Council. It is clear that human rights are not the genuine motivation that has led to this country being analysed in the Human Rights Council. Following the Iranian Revolution, the country has become a target of Western powers who have sought regime change that would allow them to seize and control the abundant resources that are possessed by this nation. President, we would like to once again reiterate that only through a focus on cooperation and dialogue can this Council be at all effective in its task of promoting and protecting all human rights. In order for that to occur, it is essential that every effort of this Council goes hand in hand with the involvement of the country in question. In this understanding, the UPR is the ideal mechanism for analysing the human rights situations in all countries. Imposed mandates, and imposed at that without consent, are doomed to failure, as indeed is the case in this example. We would like to repeat our support to the government and people of the Islamic Republic of Iran and encourage them to continue exercising their right to self-determination and to continue promoting and protecting the human rights of their population. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Excellency. And I now recognize the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Russia supports the measures taken by the Iranian leadership in the area of human rights, first and foremost in the area of social and economic rights. Russia welcomes the readiness expressed by Tehran to have more in-depth cooperation with international human rights institutions. We call for a calm, non-politicized dialogue with the Iranian government, which aims to find possibilities for interaction in the area of human rights on the basis of equality and cooperation. Thank you.
My thanks to the Russian Federation. I now recognize the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. The country-specific mandates initiated and pursued by the Western countries are aimed to infringe upon the sovereignty and interfere in the internal affairs of the developing countries. It is an anachronistic behavior to maintain the country-specific mandates despite the full operation of the UPR mechanism, which treats all countries equally and impartially. Any attempt to interfere in the internal affairs and to impose unacceptable pressure under the pretext of human rights cannot be justified, since it is in flagrant breach of the purpose of the UN Charter and relevant norms of international law and the principle of respect for sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of the states. We are of the view that human rights, and especially the Human Rights Council, should not be misused as a tool for denouncing the legitimate government of the sovereign state of the Islamic Republic of Iran. My delegation looks forward to the Human Rights Council to eliminate all sorts of country-specific resolutions and mandates, including the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I now recognize Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President. Switzerland would like to thank the Special Rapporteur for his report on the human rights situation in Iran. As he makes very clear in the aforementioned report, significant problems remain in the area of human rights, such as the modalities that are followed in the application of the death penalty, torture and repressive practices meted out against political opponents, such as arbitrary detention of human rights defenders and the violation of the rights of women. Furthermore, ethnic and religious minorities, for example the Baha'i, the Sunni, Christians or Kurds, live under the constant threat of oppression. As examples of this oppression, the long prison sentences handed down to representatives of the Baha'i community, or worse still, the death penalties meted out against the Kurd minority, are sources of particular concern. Against this backdrop, my delegation would like to make the following questions. What does the Special Rapporteur think of the increased collaboration with the Iranian authorities which has occurred since the presidential elections last year? Do you hope that you will finally be able to visit Iran? Why, in your opinion, is the Baha'i community subjected to growing oppression? Despite the fact that they are very discreet in Iran, they fly below the radar and do not criticize the government of Iran. And finally, what is your analysis of freedom of expression in Iran? Can we look forward to a strengthening of political freedoms in this country? Thank you very much. My thanks to the Ambassador of Switzerland, says the President, and I now give the floor to Myanmar.
Mr. President, my delegation would like to reiterate our principal position, which always against country-specific mandates of the Human Rights Council. We are of the view that country-specific mandates in the Human Rights Council could be counterproductive because they do not create a conducive environment for a genuine dialogue and constructive cooperation between the mandate holders and the concerned countries. Taking this opportunity, my delegation would like to stress the work of the Council should be guided by the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity and non-selectivity, and ensure elimination of double standards and politicization. And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Myanmar. We will now turn to the list of speakers representing non-governmental organizations and national human rights institutions. And the first speaker on my list is the International Baha'i Community. You have the floor.
President. Dr. Shahid, in your report you stressed that while welcoming the positive steps made by the new government of Iran, they currently do not address fully the fundamental human rights concern, including laws and practices that infringe upon various rights, including belief and religion, education and non-discrimination. The Baha'i international community concurs with this regrettable assessment. To date, there has been no improvement in the situation of Iranian Baha'is. As you indicated, 136 Baha'is are in prison solely on religious grounds. Not one Baha'i youth has been able to complete his or her studies at an Iranian university, and most of them are denied access in the first place. Shops continue to be sealed, work in the public sector is prohibited, cemeteries are desecrated, and incitement to hatred in state-sponsored media is rampant. Even the meager attempt to improve the human rights situation in Iran by drafting a citizenship rights charter, as you stated, fails to address laws and policies that discriminate against religious minorities, including the Baha'i. Dr. Shahid, you referred to several individuals whose detention was identified as arbitrary by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. Among those are the 7 former Baha'i leaders who were sentenced to 20 years imprisonment in a trial that lacked all requirement to qualify as fair under international law. They have now spent nearly 6 years behind bars, 3 to 6 months of which were in solitary confinement. Have you been able to discuss their situation, which is emblematic of the situation of all the Baha'is in Iran, with Iranian authorities? And what hope do you see for improvement in their situation under Mr. Rouhani? Moreover, as you know, in August last year, Mr. Atollah Rezvani, a prominent Baha'i from Bandar Abbas, was found in his car fatally shot in the head. Last month, 3 members of the Moody family were viciously and repeatedly stabbed by a masked intruder in the city of Birjand. Neither of these 2 crimes have been properly investigated, forcing us to assume that they are actually condoned, if not initiated, by government authorities. These are just 2 recent examples of a number of such instances of blatant impunity for crimes committed against members of the Baha'i faith. What procedural and substantive changes do you think must be made to combat this injustice? Thank you.
Je remercie.
My thanks to the international Baha'i community, and I now give the floor to Sudvind.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a joint statement of Sudvind and Human Rights Watch endorsed by FIDH, Civicus, International Campaign for Human Rights in Iran, and the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center and Iran Human Rights. Dr. Shahid, although you have correctly mentioned that your report is far from exhaustive, it does, however, capture the comprehensive nature of the Islamic Republic of Iran's violations of human rights. We hope that the human rights situation in Iran remains at the forefront of the global agenda and of this Council. Personal attack against you or the Secretary General do not change the reality inside the country. As you have noted, Iranians continue to face restrictions on expression, association, and the right to education. Gender, religious, and ethnic discrimination are commonplace. Iran's prisons are filled with arbitrarily detained human rights defenders, journalists, religious leaders, students, as well as cultural and women's rights activists, whose alleged crimes are often little more than stating an opinion the government does not agree with. These individuals face mistreatment, torture, intimidation of family members, and are denied their rights to legal counsel and fair trials. Moreover, the recent spike in unlawful executions by the Islamic Republic of Iran is alarming. We support your call and that of the High Commissioners for a moratorium on the death penalty in Iran. We believe your mandate is crucial and should be renewed by this Council. It is vital for the international community to have an independent monitor that can verify progress or lack thereof made by Islamic Republic of Iran on its UPR commitments. Dr. Shahid, could you comment on whether the Civil Rights Charter could be improved? We ask the Council to invest in lasting human rights changes in Iran. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Sudvind. And I now recognize the European Centre for Law and Justice.
Thank you, Mr. President. The ECLJ would like to thank and congratulate the Special Rapporteur for his report and activities. Despite language from the Islamic Republic of Iran espousing new moderate foreign policies, the reality on the ground is that human rights for religious minorities have not improved under President Rouhani. It is essential that the international community meet words with action and action with action. Articles 18 and 19 of the ICCPR provides that each individual has a right to choose, hold, and express one's faith without interference. Furthermore, Article 21 of the ICCPR expresses that the basic freedom of peaceful assembly applies without distinction of any kind and necessarily includes freedom of religious assembly. While these rights are enshrined in the Iranian constitution, they are rarely realized for religious minorities living within the country's borders. It is with these fundamental principles in mind that the ECLJ would like to bring to the Council's attention the ongoing human rights violation by the Islamic Republic of Iran in the case of Saeed Abedini, who is currently imprisoned for peaceful private expression of his religion. Saeed was arrested and during his visit in Iran to build a government-endorsed orphanage. And though he was tried and convicted as a national security offense, the basis of his crime was his peaceful association and expression with members of his religious community in private homes. Whereas it has neither been promulgated as a law prohibiting such religious expression, nor has it been proved how infringing this right would necessarily uphold national security. Now that the Islamic Republic of Iran's current administration has expressed a desire to recognize its citizens' basic and inalienable human rights, this Council is presented with a unique opportunity to urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to take further action in the direction and in accordance with its laws and international obligations. As Iranians begin the Nowruz celebrations at the end of March, we respectfully request the Republic of Iran to show Saeed mercy and grant him clemency. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie
Thank you very much to the European Centre for Law and Justice. And I now recognize the Iranian Elite Research Center.
Mr. President and Mr. Ahmed Shahid, the following are some of the objections, both in form and content, which can be addressed to your recent report. In terms of form, the frequent use of the words appear repeatedly alleged or similar words while attributing human rights violation to the Islamic Republic of Iran, the nose lacks of strength in evidence of documents set forth in the report. Expressing allegation sources with reference to anonymous sources such as some organization, several human rights defenders, and some sources is a sign of weakness in the reporter's arguments. It is easy to claim a violation of human rights to any country when referring to anonymous sources with firm evidence. In terms of content, in some cases it seems the reporter is apparently trying to impose a distorted reality of the regulation of the Iranian society. The following are some instances. In paragraph 16, the reporter refers to the previously controversial Iranian Penal Code of stoning and execution of under 18 offenders, wrongly as a human rights charge against Iran, without noticing the fact that Iran removed this penalty code in the recent years as a significant step in fulfilling its human rights obligation. The reporter repeatedly defined the criminal act of muharebe as enmity of God, with God. In this report, whereas the act has been clearly defined as lifting arms in purpose of taking one's life, property, or their close ones, or in intimating them by purpose of creating insecurity in the area. In many cases, there have been claims without evidential proof. For example, in paragraph 36, it is stated that religious minorities are given a harsher punishment when convicted of the same crime of a Muslim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I recognize the Prevention Association of Social Harms.
Mr. President, the coincidence of the ratification of first and second generation of human rights treaties shows its equal importance for the international community. The third generation also confirms the lack of a balanced right to development, right to enjoyment of a healthy environment, and right to peace destroy the basis for the expansion of other rights. Although there is a lot of concentration on the first generation of human rights in Mr. Shahid's report, but attention to the other two generations is very little. We are also in the same belief as the Special Rapporteur that the Iranian government must take further steps toward improvement of human rights. But at the same time, we believe the report has not dealt with the subject, the extensive violation of which have affected a vast number of people. Mr. Special Rapporteur, a large number of patients have died over the recent years solely due to untargeted, unilateral, and unjustified sanctions. That is proportionately higher than the total statistics which has mentioned in Dr. Shahid's report regarding the violation of the civil and political rights of the Iranian people. The way in which a Special Rapporteur deals with the subject of sanctions, unfortunately, are not in proportion with the sheer volumes of negative consequences on the Iranian. If Dr. Shahid, who traveled to European countries, the United States and Canada to hear about the human rights violations claims by expatriate Iranians, had at least put a questionnaire on his website and called for the participation of individuals and NGOs inside Iran in reflecting the problems caused by sanctions in daily lives and right to life, health, education, and decent living for Iranian citizens, with certainty this report would have been a more balanced narrative of the real meaning of human rights for the people of Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. Islamic Women's Institute of Iran. You have the floor.
Mr. President, the participation of over 70% of eligible voters in recent presidential elections in Iran had a very important message, and it was a message of hope and belief of Iranians in the improvement of the country's conditions and situation by Iranians and forces inside the country. In almost the 9 months that have passed since the new administration, positive human rights developments have taken place, a number of which we heard. Nevertheless, we believe that a hasty look at development and impatient expectations to see a weakness and its announcement by international monitors is in no way a constructive approach. We believe the way in which the Special Rapporteur criticized the number of executions during the 9 months of the new government is not constructive. Mr. President, Iranian society is a dynamic society. Many of current positive developments are results of the positive movements of Iranian civil society, university bodies, journalists, and the interaction between the main political power and think tanks in society. This environment is an opportunity for human rights activists in the country who, in view of the conditions in the country, try to have an accurate understanding of human rights issues in the various political, historic experiences, religious obligations, and the real priorities of Iranian people. Also, this atmosphere is an opportunity for the international community to start a real dialogue free from political tendencies with the Islamic Republic in a calm and non-political atmosphere. We believe failing to use this opportunity and concentration on methods that are based on sole criticism will be the biggest betrayal to the Iranian people, a betrayal that will replace a scientific and logical dialogue with an endless and fruitless battle. Thank you.
Thank you. Mariam Gassemi, Educational Charity Institute. You have the floor.
President. Drugs are one of the problems of mankind, and countries which are situated as transit points for this profitable trade are faced with countless number of problems. For years now, the people of Iran are paying dearly due to geographically being neighbor with the world's largest drug producer and distributor. In 2013 alone, 450 Iranian soldiers lost their lives in clashes with traffickers, and over 450 tons of drugs have been confiscated from traffickers. Mr. President, over 2/3 of prisoners in Iran are drug distributors or addicts. This shows the depth of this catastrophe for the Iranian society. Unfortunately, by concentrating on the executions that have taken place in this regard, the Special Rapporteur's report, the severity and extent of this catastrophe for the Iranian society has solely been reduced to a part of the fight of the Iranians against this problem. No pathology has been conducted, especially for the negative repercussions of the transit of drugs on Iranian citizens and even prisoners' families. The rise in number of executions is one of the negative consequences of the transit of drugs in Iran. But when this problem affects the right to life, right to health, right to development, the right to having a decent life of 75 million Iranians, our expectation from the Special Rapporteur is to have an all-sided approach to this problem. If a $7 billion trade, according to UNODC, going on the eastern borders of Iran, sharply increased after UN presence, is solely reported by the Special Rapporteur in the form of high number of executions of drug criminals without consideration of all its negative repercussions, we cannot expect positive development within society with these kind of reports. Thank you.
I thank you. Lawyers for lawyers. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lawyers Rights Watch Canada and Lawyers for Lawyers welcome the report of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We share all concerns raised, including government action targeting lawyers and erosion of independence of the legal profession, which is fundamental to human rights and the rule of law. In Iran, lawyers continue to be prosecuted, arbitrarily detained and imprisoned as a result of their human rights advocacy. We express grave concerns about reprisals against founders and members of the Center for Human Rights Defenders. At least 3 founders are still imprisoned, sentenced for founding the center. While LRWC and L4L welcomed the release of Ms. Nasreen Sotoudeh and Mr. Javeed Hutan Kian in 2013, many lawyers remain detained. We urge the immediate release of all other lawyers detained, charged or sentenced because of their legitimate performance of professional functions. We share the Special Rapporteur's concerns about the draft bill on formal attorneyship, which could further impede the independent functioning of the legal profession. The bill would introduce indirect supervision of lawyers through a supervisory committee to grant and revoke licenses of attorneys, and undefined competent bodies with powers to suspend lawyers from practicing the law. Despite concerns of Iranian lawyers and international organizations that the bill severely threatens the independence of the legal profession, this bill has not been amended. Further, despite repeated requests, the Special Rapporteur has been denied access to Iran to engage in a constructive dialogue. We join the Special Rapporteur in urging that the government of Iran promptly facilitates this visit. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. Alors, nous venons d'épuiser.
We have now concluded our speakers list for the interactive dialogue. I will therefore give the floor once more to Mr. Ahmed Shahid so that he can make his concluding remarks. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking all speakers for the views that they have expressed. And of course, you posed me many questions, and I don't think I have the time to go through all. But some of you have answered each other in your statements. The current situation in Iran is one of conflicting signals, as I state in my report. On the one hand, there have been these positive developments many speakers have highlighted, and I also note in my report, including the promulgation of a draft citizens' rights charter and a number of other pledges of change. And of course, there is the sense that the new administration is moving to implement its promises. At the same time, we have quite disturbing signals coming out from actions that are actually happening in terms of the very high execution rates that we have seen in the past few months, including the 2 months that just passed this year. The continued lack of space for civil society, especially those who want to champion human rights or advocate for human rights. The capriciousness in dealing with the media. For example, we have had in the past few months statements made in support of media freedom. At the same time, we had reformist papers shut down for content that should be protected speech. So we have this situation of conflicting signals which have to be addressed. Many had asked me what I think ought to happen, and I would again stress the importance of constructive engagement by all parties in addressing these issues. In terms of the Citizens' Rights Charter, it currently collates existing laws in the country, and of course many of these guarantee international standards, but many of them also ignore some international standards. Perhaps what the drafters can do is look through the recommendations made by the UN Human Rights Committee in their review of Iran just 2 years ago, where they reviewed Iran's compliance and efforts made by Iran to comply with the covenant. So there are a number of recommendations made by independent and credible bodies which Iran ought to look at in formulating the charter, including the covenants it has signed, the ICCPR and the ICSCR, as well as CRC, and also the UPR recommendations Iran had accepted. So if these are brought together into the charter, there would be significant improvement in what can be done. Equally, there are ways in which Iran can, if you like, engage with those with whom it's already engaging. Now, we have spoken a lot about the judiciary and so on. The UNODC has a presence in the country. Iran is familiar with the UNODC. They in addition to dealing with drugs, they have expertise in dealing with judicial reform and prison reform. I call upon Iran to engage with the UNODC in moving in that direction. The current UN, the UNDAF, doesn't have a segment on human rights, whereas the previous UNDAF had one. Again, both the UN agencies in Iran, looking at rights upfront policy of Secretary General, and Iran's own commitments, can look at how they can contribute to making the new rights charter more compliant with Iran's human rights standards. A comment or two on my methodology. I think there are some misconceptions about this. My information sources are not just people outside the country. I've interviewed 700 Iranians in my tenure now.
Over a third of them are citizens in the country, alleged victims who I interview for hours on via Skype. I consult documents published by the government of Iran as their reports to various UN human rights bodies, identifying their take on what's happening in the country. So I have consulted very widely on what government of Iran actually is producing. In terms of cooperation, I believe there is a warming up of the authorities towards the mandate over the past few months, and I welcome that, and I hope to reciprocate that and look for ways to further expand that. But I think cooperation is the key way forward. If you look at this Secretary General's report, there are areas in which Iran can actually speed up this. For example, the Human Rights Committee has been writing to Iran for now 2 years or 3 years to get information on 4 crucial aspects about women's status, about stoning, about journal executions, and so on, which Iran ought to forward to the committee so they can get a better look at what ought to be done next year. The UN, procedure on enforced disappearance has been written to Iran for now 9 years each year, seeking a visit to the country. Again, Iran could open the doors for them in line with the standing invitation issued by the government of Iran 8-9 years ago. So the things we done are known. It's a question of the willingness and the ability to move forward or around in a constructive and productive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mr. Shaheen for the presentation of his report and for the explanations and the comments that he's just provided after having listened to the statements made by delegations. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of our